He had one bus ticket home on Christmas Eve, but he let the bus pass him by. Not because he was lost, because he was ashamed to arrive empty-handed. Then a quiet stranger sat down across from him. No promises, just a phone call. And by morning, everything had changed. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The bus stop sat almost empty beneath the tired glow of yellow streetlights, their light flickering, as if even they were exhausted by Christmas Eve. Thin strands of forgotten garland drooped from the metal frame above the bench, their colors dulled by weeks of cold air and neglect. Snow fell slowly, steadily, each flake landing without sound, as if the night itself was trying not to disturb anyone. The man on the bench did not move. He sat hunched forward, shoulders round at his coat, pulled tight around his chest. It was an old coat, the fabric worn smooth at the elbows, the zipper catching halfway up. His hands rested between his knees bare and trembling not just from the cold. He stared at the ground as if something there might explain how he had ended up here. Every breath he took came out slow and heavy, turning into pale clouds that disappeared almost as soon as they formed. In the right pocket of his coat was a single bus ticket. He knew exactly where it would take him. The route, the stops, the final corner where he would get off. He had ridden that bus hundreds of times before. Tonight it could carry him home. It could carry him back to the small apartment with the crooked door frame, the faint smell of pine from a plastic Christmas tree, and the sound of his child's footsteps running down the hallway. But he stayed seated. His mind betrayed him, filling with images he had been trying to outrun all evening. His child sitting cross-legged on the floor, pretending not to look at the door too often. His wife standing at the kitchen counter, hands bulb busy, so she would not have to admit how long she had been waiting. The forced cheer in her voice when she said everything was fine. The way her smile always hesitated for just a second when she saw his empty hands. And then the question, not asked with anger, not even disappointment, just quiet hope. Did you find work? The man swallowed hard, his throat tight. He pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth, as if holding the words there could keep them from becoming real. He had rehearsed answers in his head for weeks. Temporary work, a lead that did not pan out, promises that would sound believable for one more night. None of them felt right anymore. A bus approached in the distance, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. The sound of its engine grew louder, steady, and familiar. The man felt his body tense, instinctively preparing to stand. His fingers curled slightly, brushing the edge of the ticket through the fabric of his pocket. This was it. He closed his eyes. The bus slowed, then roared past the stop without stopping, spraying slush onto the curb. The wind from it tugged at his coat, then vanished. The red taillights faded into the darkness, swallowed by the snow and the city beyond. The man exhaled a breath he did not realize he had been holding. His shoulders sagged, relief and shame colliding in his chest. He was still here, still waiting, still avoiding the one place he wanted to be most. Around him, Christmas continued without him. Somewhere nearby, laughter spilled out of a bar. A car drove past with a small tree tied to its roof. Music drifted faintly through the air, muffled and distant, like it belonged to another world. He remained on the bench, unmoving, a man with a way home who chose not to take it. The cold slowly worked its way deeper past the layers of clothing, past the skin settling somewhere heavier. The man shifted slightly on the bench, the metal biting through his coat, but he did not stand. Standing felt too close to leaving. Leaving felt too close to explaining, and explaining felt impossible. He tried to remember the last Christmas that felt normal. It had not been that long ago, just a year, maybe two. Back when mornings started early and ended with sore hands and the good kind of exhaustion. Back when his alarm clock mattered. Back when grease under his fingernails meant he had earned the dinner waiting for him at home. He could still see the factory floor clearly if he let himself. Rows of machines humming in rhythm, the smell of oil and metal. The comfort of knowing his hands were useful, that his skills meant something to someone. That place was gone now. Closed gates. A printed notice taped to a glass door. Apologies that sounded practiced. Promises of assistance that never materialized. Since then, every day had been a negotiation with dignity. Job boards that led nowhere, interviews that ended politely, silence that stretched longer each week. He had stopped telling his family details because he could see the hope drain from their faces when nothing changed. Tonight he had told them he was out late running errands. It was not a lie exactly. He had walked the city for hours watching Christmas through other people's windows. He had stood outside stores he could not afford to enter. He had paused at corners where street musicians played for loose change, wondering when everything had become this fragile. The ticket in his pocket felt heavier now, like a decision pressing against his ribs. He reached in and pulled it out, holding it between his fingers. The paper was creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. The date printed on it stared back at him. Christmas Eve. Valid. Still usable. Still waiting. He imagined stepping onto the bus. He imagined the warmth hitting his face, the familiar sway as it pulled away from the curb, the moment he would sit down and realize there was no turning back. He imagined walking through the door at home with nothing in his hands, nothing to show for the months he had been gone in spirit, even while physically present. His jaw tightened. He folded the ticket again and slid it back into his pocket, pushing it deep as if hiding it could quiet his thoughts. Snow dusted his boots. His toes were numb now, but he welcomed the sensation. Physical cold was easier than the ache in his chest. Another bus came and went, then another. Each one carried someone home, someone who belonged somewhere tonight. He stayed. Sometimes he thought loneliness was not the absence of people. It was the feeling that you no longer deserved to be seen by the ones who loved you most. It was knowing that the people waiting for you would open the door with hope in their eyes, and fearing you might be the reason that hope faded. The man leaned back against the bench, staring up at the dark sky. Snowflakes landed on his face and melted instantly, leaving cold trails behind. He did not wipe them away. He told himself he would wait just a little longer. Just until the next bus. Just until he figured out what to say. Just until the shame loosened its grip enough for him to stand. But time moved forward without answering him, and Christmas Eve continued to pass one silent minute at a time. He glanced down the empty street, then back at his hands. They looked older tonight, cracked and rough hands that once fixed engines and kept promises. Now they only held stillness. Somewhere nearby a church bell rang, once soft and distant marking time he felt unworthy to claim. Another bus approached. He did not move. The doors opened. Warm light spilled out, inviting and brief. He stayed seated, eyes lowered, breath shallow. When the doors closed again, something inside him settled into silence. Christmas would arrive whether he went home or not. The snow kept falling. The bench stayed cold, and the man remained where he was, holding onto a ticket he could not yet use, waiting for a reason to believe he was still allowed to walk through his own front door. He did not know it yet, but this pause, this refusal to board was about to change everything. The night held its breath with him, as if the city itself was waiting for one quiet moment to turn. Someone unseen was already stepping closer, and the longest night of his year was not finished yet. It was only the beginning of a Christmas he never expected coming. His name was Daniel Carter, 46 years old, born and raised in the same city where he now sat waiting on a frozen bench. He had never planned to be anywhere else. His life had always been built on routine, on showing up, on doing what was expected, and doing it well. Daniel was not the kind of man who chased big dreams. He believed in steady ones. His hands told that story better than his face ever could. They were large, rough, permanently marked by years of work. The skin around his knuckles was thick and cracked, the nails short and uneven, no matter how often he trimmed them. Those hands had turned bolts before sunrise, lifted engines heavier than they looked, wiped grease onto rags that never came clean again. Even now, sitting still, his fingers twitched slightly as if they were waiting for a tool that was no longer there. For 22 years, Daniel had worked at the same factory on the east side of town. Every morning had started the same way. Alarm at 5, coffee brewed strong enough to wake the whole apartment. A quiet drive through streets still half asleep. By 6, he was inside the building, pulling on grease-stained coveralls, nodding at the same faces he had known for decades. There was comfort in that repetition, comfort in knowing his place. He was good at his job. Everyone knew it. They used to joke that if something broke, Daniel would hear it before it failed completely. He had an ear for problems, a patience others lacked. Younger guys came to him when machines acted strange. Supervisors trusted him to keep things running when schedules tightened. He took pride in that trust. It meant something to be needed. At lunch, they sat together at long tables, trading complaints about management, laughing about old stories that never got old. There was always laughter in that break room, loud, careless laughter that only came from people who believed tomorrow would look a lot like today. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything stopped. They were called into a meeting. No warning, no rumors beforehand. The plant manager stood at the front, hands clasped too tightly, reading from a prepared statement. Market changes, rising costs, immediate closure, severance packages that sounded generous until the math was done. Apologies delivered with practiced sincerity. By the end of the week, the gates were locked. Daniel stood outside that fence longer than most. He watched trucks haul equipment away. He watched lights go dark, one section at a time. It felt unreal, like someone had erased his future without asking permission. He went home that night quieter than usual. His wife noticed. His child noticed too, even if no one said anything yet. At first, Daniel believed it would work out. He polished his resume, he filled out applications, he called old contacts. He showed up early to interviews wearing his only good jacket, answering questions carefully, honestly. "We will call you. That position has been filled. We are looking for someone with a different skill set." Silence followed each attempt. Weeks passed. Then, months. The savings thinned. Conversations at home grew shorter. Daniel stopped talking about work entirely. He carried the weight alone because he thought that was what a husband and father was supposed to do. Christmas crept closer with each unanswered application, each polite rejection. He had bought the bus ticket weeks ago on a day when hope still felt reasonable. Tonight it sat in his pocket like a promise he no longer knew how to keep. As the weeks stretched into months, Daniel began to measure time differently. Not by calendars or holidays, but by rejection emails and the slow depletion of his savings account. At first, he checked his phone constantly, convinced the next message would be the one that changed everything. Over time, the sound of notifications stopped meaning anything at all. Mornings became harder, without a job to anchor his day. Daniel woke before dawn out of habit, then lay there staring at the ceiling, unsure what to do with the hours ahead. He still brewed coffee, still got dressed, still left the apartment as if going somewhere mattered. He spent his days walking the city, visiting job centers, scanning bulletin boards, talking to people who offered sympathy but no solutions. Each rejection chipped away at something inside him. It was not anger he felt, or even despair. It was erosion, a quiet wearing down of confidence. He started second-guessing everything: his skills, his experience, his value. He wondered if the factory had been the only place left in the world that needed what he could do. He wondered if he had stayed too long, learned too narrowly, trusted stability too much. At home, he tried to be the same man he had always been. He helped with homework. He fixed small things around the apartment that still broke, though there were fewer tools now and fewer reasons to use them. He smiled when his child talked about Christmas lists and school decorations. He nodded when his wife talked about plans, even as his chest tightened. Money became the unspoken presence in every room. They talked around it, never directly about it. Groceries were chosen more carefully. Lights were turned off more often. Gifts were quietly scaled back. Daniel told himself it was temporary. He told himself children did not notice these things. Deep down, he knew better. As December arrived, the city changed. Lights went up, store windows filled with decorations. Music followed him everywhere he walked. To everyone else, it was festive. To Daniel, it felt like a countdown. Each passing day marked another chance he had failed to turn things around. Christmas loomed ahead of him like a deadline he could not meet. That was when he bought the bus ticket. It had been a decent day. He had an interview that went well enough to revive his optimism. On the way home, he stopped at the station and bought the ticket without hesitation. Christmas Eve, one way. He imagined riding that bus with relief instead of dread, walking through his front door with good news, maybe even a small gift in hand. He folded the ticket carefully and tucked it into his wallet like something sacred. When the call never came, the ticket remained. It traveled with him everywhere, in his coat pocket, in his wallet, a reminder of a version of himself that still believed effort would be enough. Tonight, as he sat on the bench, the paper felt thin and fragile, like the hope it represented. Daniel was not lazy. He was not careless. He had done everything right for most of his life. And yet, here he was, a man with strong hands and nowhere to put them, a father counting days instead of paychecks, a husband afraid of the moment he would have to admit that love alone did not pay bills. The snow continued to fall around him, quiet and indifferent as Christmas drew closer and closer. He remembered the first Christmas he brought his child home from the hospital. The snow had fallen just like this, soft and steady, as if the world itself was trying to be gentle. Back then, he believed effort was enough. Show up, work hard, protect your family, everything else would follow. That belief had carried him through long shifts, missed weekends, and aching muscles. It had given his life shape and meaning. Losing the factory did not just take his job. It took the map he had been following since he was a young man. Without it, every decision felt uncertain. Every step felt unearned. Now, sitting at the bus stop, Daniel understood something he had been avoiding for weeks. He was not afraid of his family seeing him fail. He was afraid of what it would mean if he could no longer be the man they believed he was. He rubbed his hands together slowly, feeling the rough skin scrape against itself. They were still strong, still capable. But strength without opportunity meant nothing. The ticket in his pocket pressed against his thigh. He could stand. Board the bus. Go home empty-handed and try to explain. Or he could stay here a little longer, wrapped in cold and silence, delaying the moment when hope would have to survive without proof. Christmas lights flickered above the street, reflected in the thin layer of ice forming along the curb. Somewhere nearby a family laughed. Somewhere else a door closed against the cold. Daniel stayed seated, breathing slowly, letting the night decide for him. He did not know that this pause, this small act of waiting, was placing him in the path of something unexpected. The longest nights often hide the quietest beginnings. And this night was not finished yet. Change was coming, carried softly through falling snow and human kindness alone. The city did not slow down for him. It moved faster, louder, brighter, as if Christmas Eve demanded momentum from everyone still standing. Cars lined the streets, trunks popping open and closed as gifts were shifted and reshuffled. Store windows glowed with soft, golden light, reflecting snowflakes like small sparks. Everywhere Daniel looked, people were carrying something. Bags, boxes, wrapped promises held tight against their chests. A group of coworkers passed the bus stop, laughing, their breath puffing white in the cold. Someone complained jokingly about last-minute shopping. Someone else talked about getting home before the roads iced over. Daniel lowered his eyes as they walked by, suddenly aware of how still he was, how empty his hands looked resting on his knees. From across the street, a bus pulled up to the curb and hissed to a stop. Its interior lights spilled out through fogged windows, revealing rows of tired but content faces. Daniel watched without thinking, his gaze catching on a small detail. A child sat near the window, clutching a brightly wrapped box almost as big as their torso. The child pressed their forehead against the glass, eyes wide with excitement, bouncing slightly in their seat. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He turned his head away slowly, not because the sight hurt, but because it reminded him of what he could not bring with him tonight. His own child would be waiting with that same restless energy, pretending not to listen for footsteps in the hallway, pretending not to count the minutes. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up his face for a brief moment, harsh and unforgiving. No missed calls, no new messages. He refreshed his email, knowing what he would see before it loaded. Nothing. The silence felt heavier tonight, as if even rejection would have been easier to carry than this endless waiting. He locked the phone and slid it back into his pocket. His thoughts drifted to practical matters, the kind that surfaced when hope grew tired. He wondered how much he could get for the bus ticket if he sold it. Enough for a hot meal, maybe. Enough to sit somewhere warm for a while instead of freezing on this bench. The idea made his stomach twist. Selling the ticket would mean giving up the last thread tying him to home tonight. Another thought followed, quieter and darker. He could sleep outside. He had done it before, on nights when he stayed out too late searching for work, too embarrassed to explain why he was empty-handed again. He knew which doorways blocked the wind best. He knew how to keep moving just enough to avoid drawing attention. The fact that he was considering it frightened him more than the cold. Daniel leaned back against the bench and closed his eyes, listening to the city breathe around him. Somewhere bells rang softly. Somewhere else music drifted through an open door, muffled but warm. The sounds of celebration felt distant, like echoes from a life he had stepped out of without realizing it. He wondered briefly what would happen if he simply disappeared from this night altogether. Not dramatically, not permanently, just slipping away from expectations, from questions, from the weight of disappointing the people he loved most. The thought came and went quickly, leaving behind a hollow ache. Daniel opened his eyes again and stared straight ahead. Christmas Eve continued unfolding without him, bright and busy and full. And he remained on the bench, a quiet figure at the edge of other people's joy, trying to remember when hope had last felt this far away. The cold deepened as the night wore on, but the city only seemed to grow warmer in response. Doorways opened and closed with bursts of light and laughter. Cars pulled away from curbs, packed with families, eager to reach dinner tables already set. Daniel watched it all from the bench, feeling as if there were an invisible line he was no longer allowed to cross. A couple stopped nearby, arguing quietly about directions before breaking into laughter again. The woman leaned into the man's shoulder, her scarf brushing his cheek. They moved on, leaving behind only their footprints in the snow. Daniel followed those footprints with his eyes until they blurred together. He tried not to compare. He told himself that everyone carried their own weight, their own private fears, but Christmas had a way of stripping away those reminders. Tonight, happiness felt loud, visible, public, and his absence from it felt deliberate, as if he had chosen this place on the bench as a punishment. Another bus rolled in, slowing as it approached the stop. The driver glanced toward him, waiting. Daniel did not stand. After a moment, the bus pulled away again. He watched it go, the warmth inside shrinking into a distant glow. His phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket. His heart jumped before he could stop it. He pulled it out too quickly, fingers clumsy, hope rising despite himself. The screen lit up with a notification from a store advertising last-minute holiday sales. He stared at it for a long second, then turned the screen off. The disappointment settled quickly, familiar now, like an old bruise pressed again. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He wondered how many people would notice if he did not come home tonight. His wife would worry first, then she would get angry at herself for worrying. His child would wait by the door longer than usual, then fall asleep on the couch. Tomorrow morning questions would be asked gently at first, then with growing concern. The thought of causing that pain made his chest ache. And yet the thought of walking through the door empty-handed felt worse. Not because of judgment, because of the look in their eyes when they realized there was no good news coming. No turning point, no story to make the waiting worth it. Daniel reached into his pocket and touched the edge of the ticket again, not pulling it out this time, just confirming it was still there, still real, still an option he was refusing. Snow gathered along the curb, forming thin white lines that softened the hard edges of the street. The city looked gentler under its cover, quieter. Daniel wished he could feel that softness inside himself. He stayed seated, letting the minutes pass, counting buses instead of blessings. Each one that came and went marked another choice, made by doing nothing at all. Christmas Eve pressed forward, unbothered by his indecision. and Daniel sat at the bus stop, caught between wanting to belong and believing he no longer deserved to, waiting for something he could not name to interrupt the night. Daniel pulled his collar higher and watched the snow settle on the empty pavement. Each flake felt like a second ticking away. He tried to picture tomorrow morning if he stayed here all night, waking cold, hungry, explaining nothing because there would be no one to explain it to. The thought scared him more than he expected. He was not a man who vanished. He showed up, even when he was tired, even when he had nothing left. That belief had shaped his whole life, and tonight it was cracking under the weight of everything he had lost. A bus approached again, slower this time, its brakes sighing as it stopped. The doors opened, warm air drifted out. The driver waited. Daniel stayed seated. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. He felt smaller as it disappeared. Across the street, a family stepped off another bus, laughing as they hurried toward a car piled with gifts. The youngest child slipped, then laughed harder when caught. Daniel looked away, blinking quickly, his jaw tight. He checked his phone one last time. Still nothing. No call, no message, no miracle arriving late. He told himself miracles were for other people anyway. People who deserved them. People who had something to offer in return. Daniel rested his hands on his knees and breathed slowly. If he stayed a little longer, nothing would change. If he left now, everything would hurt. He did not know which choice was worse. So he stayed. He stayed because staying meant not failing in front of the people he loved. It meant postponing disappointment for just a few more minutes. It meant pretending that hope had not completely run out yet. The snow kept falling. Christmas lights flickered softly, and Daniel Carter remained on the bench, unseen, waiting. Daniel did not notice the man at first. That was the strange part. In a city that felt too loud, too bright, too full, this arrival made no sound at all. No hurried footsteps, no cough against the cold, no phone call or rustle of bags. One moment, the opposite bench was empty. The next, someone was sitting there close enough to share the same pocket of streetlight, far enough to respect the silence. The stranger wore a dark coat, simple and well-worn, zipped halfway up. His boots were dusted with snow. His posture was relaxed, not slouched, not rigid, just present. His hands rested loosely on his thighs, fingers still as if he had nowhere else he needed to be tonight. Daniel kept his eyes forward. He registered the presence the way one notices a passing shadow, with mild awareness, no interest, no curiosity. People sat near him all the time. Most stayed only long enough to check the bus schedule before leaving. This man did neither. He simply sat. Snow continued to fall between them, soft and steady. The stranger did not look at Daniel right away. He looked down the street instead, then up at the garlands drooping above the shelter. He took in the scene quietly, as if the night itself deserved attention. There was no impatience in him, no urgency, just waiting. Daniel shifted slightly, the bench creaking beneath him. He wondered if the man would say something, ask for directions, make small talk about the cold. Most people did. He braced himself for it without turning his head. Nothing came. The silence stretched long enough to feel intentional. Daniel found that unexpected. He had grown used to noise filling every empty space. Tonight had been full of it. Music, laughter, engines, announcements. This silence felt different. It did not demand anything from him. It did not ask him to respond or explain or perform. He breathed out slowly. From the corner of his eye, Daniel could see the stranger's face now. Calm, thoughtful. His eyes followed the snow as it drifted past the light, each flake catching briefly before disappearing. There was something familiar about the stillness of him. Not distant, not closed off, just grounded. Another bus passed without stopping. The stranger did not move. Daniel realized then that the man was not waiting for a bus at all, or at least not in the way most people waited. There was no checking the schedule, no restless glances at the road, no sighs of frustration. He was simply there, sharing the same cold air, the same quiet moment. Daniel felt his shoulders lower slightly without meaning to. For the first time that night, he did not feel alone in his waiting. Not understood, not helped, just not alone. The stranger finally spoke, his voice low and even, carrying easily through the cold. Cold night. That was all. Not a question, not an invitation, just an observation offered gently without expectation. Daniel nodded once in response, his breath fogging the air. "Yeah," he said. The stranger smiled faintly, then returned his gaze to the street. He did not push the conversation further. He did not fill the silence with stories or advice. He allowed it to settle again, comfortable and unforced. Snow gathered on the edge of the bench between them. Two men sat side by side on Christmas Eve, neither asking anything of the other. And somehow in that shared stillness, the night began to feel different. They sat like that for a while, two silhouettes beneath the streetlight, the city flowing around them without invitation. Daniel did not know why the stranger's presence felt different from everyone else who had passed through the stop that night. Perhaps it was because he did not look at his phone. Perhaps it was because he did not seem in a hurry to be anywhere else. Or perhaps it was simply because he had chosen to stay. Daniel stared ahead, eyes fixed on the road where buses came and went. He could feel the cold pressing against his spine, but it bothered him less now. The silence between them was not empty. It felt deliberate, like a pause neither of them wanted to interrupt too quickly. The stranger shifted slightly, crossing one ankle over the other. Snow slid off his boot and melted on the concrete. He breathed in slowly, then out as if grounding himself in the moment. There was no tension in him, no restlessness. He looked like someone who had learned how to wait without fighting it. Another group passed by the stop, bundled in scarves and coats, laughing loudly. One of them glanced briefly at the two men on the benches, then looked away just as quickly. Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to shrink, to become invisible. The stranger did not react at all. He did not flinch. He did not straighten. He did not turn away. He simply stayed where he was, eyes still on the street, as if the passing crowd had no bearing on his right to sit there. That quiet certainty settled something inside Daniel. After a few moments, the stranger spoke again, his voice still calm. "Feels like the kind of night where everything slows down," he said. Daniel considered the words. He nodded once. "Or stops," Daniel replied. The stranger smiled softly at that, not amused, not pitying, just acknowledging the truth in it. "Sometimes that's not the worst thing," he said. Daniel let the thought linger. He did not answer right away. He watched snow collect along the curb, smoothing out cracks and stains, making the street look gentler than it really was. The city under snow always looked kinder than it felt. "I don't usually sit this long," Daniel said finally, surprising himself. The stranger turned his head slightly enough to show he was listening, but not so much that it felt like scrutiny. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," Daniel continued. "Just needed to tonight." The stranger nodded again. No follow-up questions, no curiosity that crossed into intrusion, just acceptance, as if needing to sit was reason enough. A bus approached, slowing as it neared the stop. The headlights washed over them briefly, then moved on when Daniel did not stand. The stranger remained seated, hands still resting on his thighs. Daniel noticed then how ordinary the man looked. No sharp edges, no signs of importance, just another face softened by the cold and the falling snow. If he recognized him at all, it was only as someone familiar in the way kind strangers sometimes were, reminding you of someone you once knew. The bus disappeared into the night. The stranger exhaled quietly. "Plenty of nights like this," he said almost to himself. Daniel glanced at him, really looked this time. "Yeah," he agreed. They fell back into silence, but it felt different now. Warmer, somehow. As if something had shifted simply because one man had chosen to sit down beside another without trying to fix him. On a night full of noise and celebration, that restraint mattered more than words. Snow gathered quietly along the edges of the shelter, softening the hard metal and concrete around them. The stranger brushed a few flakes from his sleeve, then rested his hands again, open and still. He did not check the time. He did not sigh. He did not signal impatience in any way. Daniel noticed that. Most people filled silence because they were afraid of it. This man seemed comfortable inside it, comfortable enough to share it with someone else without explanation. That alone made the night feel less heavy. Another minute passed, then another. Daniel felt the urge to speak rise and fade again. He was not sure what he would say. There was nothing new to explain, nothing that could be fixed by talking. Still, something about the stranger's presence made it easier to breathe. "You waiting on someone?" Daniel asked finally. The stranger shook his head gently. "No," he said, "just waiting." The answer surprised Daniel, not because it was strange, but because it sounded honest. Waiting without an object, without a destination. Waiting because sometimes that was all there was to do. Daniel nodded and looked back toward the street. They sat together as another bus passed its windows, glowing briefly before sliding into darkness. The stranger did not move. Daniel did not move either. In that quiet moment, something subtle shifted. The bench no longer felt like a place of exile. It felt shared, chosen, temporary. Daniel did not know the man's name. He did not know why he was there. He did not know that this stranger would soon change the course of his night. For now, all that mattered was this. On the coldest evening of the year, when shame and loneliness pressed hardest, someone had chosen to sit beside him. The silence between them did not break all at once. It loosened slowly, like ice giving way under steady pressure. "The buses are running slower tonight," the stranger said, his voice low and unhurried. "Weather like this always messes with the schedule." Daniel nodded, eyes still on the road. "Yeah, they've been late all week," he replied. "Feels like everything's late lately." The stranger smiled faintly at that, not because it was funny, but because it was true. He shifted slightly on the bench, careful not to crowd Daniel's space. "Used to bother me more," the stranger said, waiting. "Now I don't mind it as much." Daniel considered that. "I don't think I ever liked waiting," he said. "Even as a kid, Christmas felt like it took forever to get here." That earned a quiet chuckle from the stranger. "Yeah," he said. "Back then it felt bigger too, like the whole year pointed to one morning." Daniel's thoughts drifted without resistance. "My dad used to wake us up before sunrise," he said. "Didn't matter how early it was. He'd flip on the lights and say, 'You've waited long enough.'" The stranger listened, head tilted slightly, eyes soft. He did not interrupt. He did not steer the memory anywhere else. Now Daniel continued, "It just sneaks up on you. One day it's summer. Next thing you know, it's Christmas Eve, and you're here." He gestured vaguely at the bus stop, the snow, the empty bench. The stranger followed the gesture with his eyes, then nodded. "Yeah," he said simply. They sat for a moment, the memory hanging between them. Another bus passed slower than the last, its engine humming steadily as it disappeared down the street. Daniel exhaled a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I used to fix those," he said suddenly. The words surprised him as much as they might have surprised anyone else. He glanced sideways, half expecting a question to follow. The stranger did not ask one. "Buses," he said. "Engines," Daniel clarified. "All kinds. Factory work mostly. Been doing that most of my life." "Sounds like honest work," the stranger replied. Daniel shrugged. "It was work," he said. That was enough. There was no pride in his voice now. No bitterness either. Just distance, as if he were talking about someone else's life. The stranger nodded again, accepting the statement as it was. "You heading home tonight?" he asked gently, not probing, just acknowledging the hour. Daniel hesitated. His fingers curled against his coat, then relaxed. Eventually he said, "I think." The stranger did not press. Daniel stared at the street, watching snow gather along the curb. "I haven't gone yet," he added after a moment. "Not because I don't want to, just haven't." The stranger turned slightly enough to show he was listening fully now, but still without urgency. "Yeah," he said. Daniel swallowed. "Hard to walk through the door when people are hoping for something you don't have," he said quietly. The stranger said nothing. He didn't need to. For the first time that night, Daniel felt like the words had landed somewhere safe. The snow fell a little heavier, the flakes larger now, drifting down at an unhurried pace. Daniel watched them as if they were thoughts he did not need to chase. The stranger beside him remained still, giving the moment room to breathe. "I don't talk about it much," Daniel said after a while. His voice was steady but quieter now. "Feels easier to keep it simple." The stranger nodded once, not encouraging him forward, not pulling him back. Just staying. Daniel continued anyway. "Most days I tell myself tomorrow will be different," he said. "That I'll wake up and something will have shifted. A call, an email, something small that changes the direction." He paused, then added, "Tonight didn't feel like the night for that." The stranger looked out toward the road, headlights gliding past like distant stars. "Some nights are just heavy," he said. "Doesn't mean they last." Daniel let that settle. It wasn't advice, it wasn't reassurance, just a truth spoken softly. "When I was working," Daniel said, "Christmas felt earned. You know, you put in the hours, you come home tired, and the day means something." He shook his head faintly. "Now it feels like I skipped a step." The stranger smiled, slightly thoughtful. "Funny how we tie worth to effort," he said. "Hard habit to break." Daniel glanced at him. "Feels wrong not to," he replied. "Maybe," the stranger said, "or maybe it's just what we were taught." Another bus slowed near the stop, its brakes sighing. Daniel watched it approach, then pass when he stayed seated. He did not feel the same tightening in his chest this time. Something about talking even this gently had taken the edge off the waiting. "My kid's probably still awake," Daniel said almost to himself. "They always fight sleep on Christmas Eve." The stranger smiled more openly now. "Mine used to," he said. Daniel looked at him again, curiosity flickering briefly, then fading. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. "They leave cookies out," Daniel continued. "Even now. They know better, but they still do it." A faint smile tugged at his mouth before disappearing. "I just don't want to walk in with nothing. Not again." The stranger's expression softened. "Sounds like you care a lot," he said. Daniel nodded slowly. "That's the problem," he replied. "Caring doesn't always fix things." "No," the stranger agreed, "but it's not nothing either." They sat in that truth together, the city muffled by snow and distance. The conversation did not feel like a confession. It felt like something simpler, like laying a heavy coat down for a moment and realizing you could still stand without it. Daniel did not know why he was saying these things. He only knew that the stranger wasn't asking for them. That made all the difference. The night pressed in around them, but the space between the two men felt steady now. Not hopeful, not resolved, just human. And for Daniel, that was enough to keep talking. The stranger leaned back slightly, resting his shoulders against the shelter frame. He looked up at the garlands above them, then back toward the street, as if measuring time by snowfall instead of clocks. He did not ask Daniel's name. He did not ask how long he had been out of work. That absence of questions made the space between them feel steady. "I keep telling myself it's just pride," Daniel said. "That if I could get over it, I'd already be on that bus." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But it's more than that. It's the look in their eyes when they see me. They don't judge me. That's what makes it harder." The stranger nodded slowly. "Hope can feel heavier than disappointment," he said. Daniel let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly it." Another bus rolled past, tires hissing over wet pavement. Daniel watched it without flinching. For the first time that night, he felt no urgency to chase it. "I don't need anyone to fix it," Daniel said. "I just needed to say it out loud, I guess." The stranger smiled, gentle and brief. "Sometimes that's enough," he replied. They fell quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It no longer pressed against Daniel's chest. It rested there instead, like a hand reminding him he was still breathing. Snow gathered on their coats, melting slowly into dark spots. The streetlight hummed softly above them. Somewhere far off, music played, but it sounded muted now, less demanding. Daniel glanced at the stranger once more. "Thanks for listening," he said. The stranger met his eyes and nodded. "Anytime." No promises followed, no encouragement dressed up as certainty. Just that simple exchange offered without expectation. Daniel looked back toward the road, fingers resting loosely on his knees. He felt exposed, but not weak. He had not been pushed. He had not been rushed. He had been allowed to arrive at his own truth. On a night full of noise and celebration, that patience mattered. Two men sat at a bus stop on Christmas Eve, sharing nothing more than cold air and quiet understanding. And without realizing it, Daniel had taken the first step away from the bench, even while still seated. Daniel's fingers moved again, restless, now slipping into his coat pocket and brushing against the folded paper he had been trying not to think about all night. He hesitated, then drew his hand back out, resting it on his knee instead. His gaze stayed fixed on the street, but his breathing had changed. Slower, heavier. "There's something else," he said quietly. The stranger did not turn right away. He did not lean in or shift closer. He stayed exactly where he was, as if to say there was no rush, no pressure to perform. Daniel swallowed. "I've got a ticket," he continued. "One way." He paused, then added, "It's right here." He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling the ticket out. The paper looked small in his hand, fragile. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, staring at it, as though it might dissolve if he looked too hard. "I could get on the next bus," Daniel said. "I could be home in less than an hour." The words hung in the cold air. The stranger glanced at the ticket, then back to Daniel's face. He said nothing. Daniel's grip tightened slightly. "But I can't," he said. His voice did not break. That almost made it worse. "I don't want to walk in with nothing." He went on, "I don't mean gifts. I mean something. Proof. Anything that says I didn't just sit here and wait while they believed in me." He laughed once under his breath, a sound with no humor in it. "I used to bring things home," Daniel said. "Paychecks, groceries, fixes, answers. Even on bad days I had something to hand over. Some way to say, I did my part." He folded the ticket again slowly, carefully, as if it were important not to tear it. "Now all I've got is this," he said. "And if I use it, it feels like I'm admitting that this is it, that I don't have anything else left to give." The stranger's face remained calm. His eyes stayed on Daniel, steady and open. There was no sign of judgment there, no disagreement, no rush to reframe what had been said. Daniel's shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of the words had finally found somewhere to rest. "I know it probably sounds stupid," he said. "They don't ask for proof. They don't keep score. My kid just wants me there. My wife just wants me home." He shook his head slowly. "But I need to bring something," he said again. "I need to walk through that door feeling like I'm still useful." The snow fell more thickly now, landing on the ticket in his hand. A flake melted into the paper, leaving a dark spot behind. Daniel brushed it away without thinking. The stranger finally spoke, his voice low and even. "It doesn't sound stupid," he said. That was all. No reassurance, no argument, no attempt to fix the logic or soften the truth. Just acknowledgement. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, breathing out through his nose. For a moment he looked exhausted, in a way the cold alone could not explain. When he opened his eyes again, he folded the ticket once more and slipped it back into his pocket. They sat in silence after that. It was not an empty silence. It was full of everything Daniel had just said, everything he had been carrying alone. The city continued to move around them, buses passing lights flickering Christmas, continuing on schedule. But on that bench, two men stayed still. And for the first time that night, Daniel felt like he had told the truth all the way through. The silence that followed did not rush to fill itself. Daniel kept his eyes on the street, but his shoulders were tense now, as if he were bracing for something. He had said the words out loud. That alone felt dangerous. Once spoken, they could not be pulled back into his chest, where they had lived quietly for weeks. The stranger did not speak right away. He did not argue that being present was enough. He did not say that love mattered more than money. He did not offer the familiar phrases Daniel had heard from well-meaning people who wanted to help, but did not quite understand. There was no quick reassurance waiting on the other side of the confession. Instead, there was patience. Snow continued to fall, catching in the stranger's hair, settling on his coat. He brushed none of it away. His attention remained fully on Daniel, as if nothing else in the city mattered more than letting him finish. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath shaking just slightly. "I keep telling myself tomorrow," he said, "that if I just wait one more day, I'll have something to bring with me, something that makes it easier to look them in the eye." He shook his head, but nights like this make you realize how thin that hope really is. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground between his boots. "I don't want them to think I've given up," he said. "I don't want my kid to remember this Christmas as the one where their dad came home looking defeated." The word hung there, defeated. Daniel pressed his lips together, then continued quieter now. "I know I can't protect them from everything he said, but I always thought I could protect them from this. From seeing me not know what to do." The stranger shifted slightly, not closer, not farther, just enough to show he was still there. "That's a heavy thing to carry," he said. Daniel nodded once. "It's heavier than the cold," he replied. Another bus approached, its headlights washing over them. The driver slowed, waiting. Daniel did not stand. The doors stayed closed. After a moment, the bus pulled away. Daniel watched it disappear, then glanced down at his hands. "They're still strong," he said, almost in disbelief. "These hands, they can still fix things, but strength doesn't mean much when no one needs it." The stranger listened, his expression unchanged, calm and grounded. Daniel straightened slightly, as if realizing something in the act of speaking it. "I'm not asking for pity," he said, "and I'm not waiting for a miracle. I just don't know how to cross that last distance without feeling like I'm letting them down." The stranger nodded, slowly. "You're trying to bring dignity home with you," he said. Daniel looked up at him, surprised by the precision of the words. "Yeah," he said after a moment, "that's exactly it." The stranger did not add anything else. He let that truth stand on its own. They sat together again in silence, the confession settling between them like fresh snow. It was heavy, but it was clean. And for Daniel, that made all the difference. Daniel leaned back against the bench, exhaustion finally catching up to him. The confession had taken something out of him, leaving his chest hollow and sore. He stared at the dark street, waiting for the familiar urge to explain himself further, to soften what he had said. It never came. The stranger remained quiet beside him, hands resting calmly, gaze steady. There was no judgment in his silence, no attempt to reshape the truth Daniel had laid bare. That restraint felt rare. It felt earned. Daniel swallowed and nodded once, as if acknowledging himself. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's the whole thing." The stranger did not rush to respond. He simply stayed present, allowing the weight of the moment to exist without interference. Snow brushed the shoulders of both men, melting slowly unnoticed. Daniel felt tears threaten sharp and sudden, but he blinked them away. He was not embarrassed by them. He just was not ready. Not yet. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The city hummed in the distance. Somewhere laughter echoed. Somewhere else a door closed against the cold. None of it intruded here. Daniel breathed in, then out, steadying himself. "Thanks," he said, barely above a whisper. The stranger nodded gently. The silence that followed was different now. It was not avoidance. It was understanding. It held everything Daniel had said without trying to fix it or make it smaller. On that bench under falling snow, Daniel felt something shift. Not hope yet, not relief, just the quiet certainty that his truth had been heard completely. And, for the first time that night, that was enough. Something unseen settled between them. Fragile but real, promising that even in waiting dignity could survive the longest night without demand explanation or applause from the world around them. The stranger was quiet for a long moment after Daniel finished speaking. Not the kind of pause that searched for the right words, but the kind that honored what had already been said. Snow continued to fall around them, soft and steady, filling the space where advice usually rushed in too quickly. Then the stranger spoke again. "Can I tell you something?" he asked gently. Daniel nodded without looking at him. "Yeah," he said. The stranger took a slow breath, his eyes still on the street ahead. There were times, he began, when all I had to bring back with me was myself. Daniel turned his head slightly, not out of curiosity, but because something in the tone felt familiar. Not dramatic, not heavy-handed, just honest. I lost people, the stranger continued. People I thought would always be there. And when that happens, the world gets very quiet. You start measuring yourself by what's missing instead of what's still there. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I remember walking into rooms where I felt like I had nothing to offer anyone. No solutions, no good news, just presence. And I remember thinking that wasn't enough. Daniel listened, his posture still, his attention fully anchored now. It took me a long time to understand. The stranger said that being there is not the same thing as being empty. He did not mention names. He did not explain circumstances. He did not draw lines between their lives. He simply shared the shape of the feeling, letting Daniel recognize it on his own terms. There were nights, he went on, when I felt like I was carrying nothing but loss, and I worried that people could see it on me, that it would weigh them down too. Daniel swallowed. The stranger glanced at him briefly, then back toward the road. But sometimes, he said, the thing you're afraid to bring home is the very thing people need most. Not answers, not proof, just you showing up. He said it quietly without emphasis, as if it were a truth he had learned slowly, reluctantly. Daniel frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in thought. I'm not saying it makes things easy, the stranger added, and I'm not saying it fixes anything overnight. It didn't for me. He let out a faint breath, but it mattered more than I knew at the time. Another bus passed, its headlights sweeping over them. Daniel did not follow it with his eyes this time. He stayed focused on the words settling in his chest. The stranger did not look at him expectantly. He did not wait for understanding or agreement. He simply shared what had been his, then allowed it to rest. Daniel felt something loosen just slightly. Not the weight of responsibility, not the fear of disappointment, but the sharp edge of believing that worth could be measured by what he carried through the door. They sat together again in silence. Two men on a bench sharing different lives shaped by similar moments of loss. And without drawing attention to himself, the stranger had held up a mirror that did not accuse, did not instruct, but quietly reflected the truth. Daniel had been too close to see. The night remained cold, but it no longer felt empty. Daniel did not respond right away. He stared ahead at the road, but his focus had shifted inward. The stranger's words did not land like advice. They landed like recognition, like something that had been waiting to be named. The stranger did not continue immediately. He allowed the moment to breathe. I didn't grow up thinking I'd be okay with uncertainty, he said after a while. I liked knowing where I stood. I liked feeling useful. When that disappeared, I felt untethered. Daniel nodded faintly. There were days, the stranger went on, when I felt like I was taking up space instead of earning it. Like the only thing I had to offer was quiet, and I didn't think quiet counted for much. He smiled slightly, not bitter, just reflective. It took loss to teach me something strange, he said, that people don't always need what we think they do. Sometimes they just need to know you're still there, still standing, still choosing to come back. Daniel shifted on the bench, his breath slow and steady. I used to think strength was about carrying everything alone, the stranger said, about not letting anyone see the cracks. He shook his head gently. Turns out strength can also be sitting down when you're tired and letting someone see you as you are. The words settled softly between them. Daniel glanced at him, then really looking this time. There was no performance in the stranger's face, no pride, no sense that he was sharing something to be admired. It felt offered, not presented. You don't sound like someone who gave up, Daniel said quietly. The stranger met his eyes for a moment, then looked away again. I didn't, he said. But there were moments when it felt like I had nothing left to give. I had to learn that being present wasn't quitting. It was surviving. Another bus slowed near the stop, then passed on. Daniel did not react. When I stopped measuring myself by outcomes, the stranger continued, I started to understand that worth isn't something you earn every day. It's something you carry whether you feel it or not. Daniel let out a slow breath. That's hard to believe, he said. Yeah, the stranger replied. "It was for me, too." They sat quietly again, the city muffled by falling snow. Daniel felt the familiar tightness in his chest ease just a fraction, not enough to disappear, enough to remind him that it could. The stranger did not push further. He had shared what he needed to share, nothing more. And for Daniel, that restraint mattered as much as the words themselves. It told him that this wasn't about lessons or comparisons. It was about standing beside someone in the dark and saying, without saying it directly, "You are not broken because you are tired." The night continued around them, cold and slow, but the bench no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt like a place where something had been quietly returned to Daniel piece by piece. Daniel sat with the stranger's words settling slowly inside him. He did not feel convinced or transformed. What he felt was permission. Permission to stop proving something for a moment. Permission to breathe without calculating worth. The stranger shifted his hands slightly, rubbing warmth back into his fingers. He did not look at Daniel when he spoke again. "I used to think bringing something home meant fixing everything," he said. "When I couldn't, I thought I was failing the people I loved." He paused. It took time to realize they weren't measuring me the way I was measuring myself. Daniel nodded once. "They just wanted me there," the stranger continued. "Some nights that was all I could manage. Walking through the door with nothing but myself felt unbearable. But not walking through it would have hurt them more." The words landed gently, not as instruction, but as lived memory. Daniel looked down at his boots dusted white with snow. He imagined the front door at home, the sound it made when it opened, the warmth inside, the faces waiting. He felt the familiar tightening again, but this time it came with something else. A quiet steadiness. "I don't know if I'm ready," Daniel said. The stranger nodded. "You don't have to be ready," he said. "You just have to be real." Another bus passed slower now, its lights softer in the falling snow. Daniel watched it go without regret. "I didn't come out tonight looking for answers," the stranger said. "Just figured no one should have to sit alone with thoughts like that." Daniel glanced at him, eyes tired but clearer than before. "Guess I got lucky," Daniel said. The stranger smiled small and unassuming. Maybe he replied. They sat together again, not speaking. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like understanding. For the first time that night, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not hope yet, not certainty, just the quiet knowledge that being empty-handed did not mean being empty. Snow continued to fall steady and calm, and on that bench 2 men shared a truth that required no proof at all. It lingered between them, quiet and complete, asking nothing and promising nothing. In that stillness, the night softened, and Daniel realized he was still standing, still present, and still allowed to be human tonight. Without needing proof, permission replaced shame at last here. The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy in the same way. Daniel sat back against the bench shoulders, resting against cold metal eyes fixed on the road, as if he were watching thoughts pass instead of buses. The stranger beside him remained still for a few moments longer, as though making sure the space they had reached was not rushed past too quickly. Then quietly, the stranger shifted. "I'm going to step away for a minute," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "Won't be long." Daniel turned his head, slightly surprised by how normal the request sounded. "Sure," he replied. The stranger stood brushing snow from his coat with an absent motion. He did not stretch or sigh. He did not announce anything important. He simply took a few steps away from the bench, far enough to give privacy, close enough to remain within sight. Daniel watched without curiosity. He did not wonder what the man was doing. He did not lean forward or strain to listen. After everything they had shared, questions felt unnecessary. Whatever the stranger needed to do, he trusted it did not involve him. The stranger stopped near the edge of the shelter, turning his back slightly to the street. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. The screen glowed briefly against the dark, then dimmed as he lifted it to his ear. Daniel looked away. He focused instead on the snow collecting along the curb, the thin layer of ice forming where melted flakes refroze. He listened to the distant hum of traffic, the soft crunch of footsteps passing behind him. He did not hear the words being spoken, only the faint murmur of a voice, carried away by the night. Time passed strangely then. It did not feel long, but it did not feel short either. Daniel was aware of his own breathing, steady and slow. He was aware of the ticket still tucked safely in his pocket. He was aware that something was happening without him being invited into it, and for once that felt fine. The stranger ended the call without ceremony. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and stood there for a moment longer, looking up at the falling snow. Then he turned and walked back toward the bench. Daniel glanced at him, searching for a clue. There was none. The stranger's expression was the same as before, calm, neutral, unchanged. He sat back down in his original spot, hands resting again on his thighs. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel waited not expectantly but attentively. He had learned tonight that silence often said more than explanations. The stranger finally spoke. "Well," he said quietly, "it's getting late." Daniel nodded. "Yeah," he replied. The stranger stood again, this time more deliberately. He adjusted his coat and stepped back from the bench. "I should head out," he said. "Good talking with you." Daniel felt a small, unexpected pull in his chest. "Same," he said. The stranger hesitated for half a second, then added, "I hope you have a good night." There was no promise in his tone, no implication of change, just a simple wish offered honestly. Daniel watched as the stranger walked away, his figure blending into the softly falling snow, unremarkable and unforgettable all at once. He did not know why the man had made the call. He did not know what it meant, and that not knowing kept the night suspended, balanced between what had been said and what might still happen next. Daniel stayed seated after the stranger walked away, his eyes following the dark outline until it blended fully into the night. The bench felt different now. Not warmer, not softer, just less heavy, as if something invisible had been shifted without being named. He looked down at his hands again, flexing his fingers slowly. They still felt numb from the cold, but there was a steadiness there he hadn't noticed before, the kind that came from being seen without being examined. Another bus passed. Daniel did not stand. He reached into his pocket and touched the ticket once more, feeling the familiar crease. It was still there, still an option. Nothing about his situation had changed. No job offer had appeared. No miracle had arrived late and apologetic. And yet something felt unsettled in a different way now. The stranger had not said he would help, had not hinted at solutions or connections, had not even asked Daniel what he needed. He had simply stepped away, made a call, and returned without explanation. That restraint echoed in Daniel's mind more loudly than any promise would have. If the man had wanted credit, he would have stayed. If the man had wanted gratitude, he would have explained. Instead, he had left Daniel alone with his thoughts again, but this time they were quieter. Daniel leaned back and stared at the shelter roof, watching snow collect and slide off in soft clumps. He wondered briefly if he should have asked the stranger's name. The thought came and went. Names felt less important than moments like this. The city continued around him, but it felt farther away now. The laughter, the music, the movement, all of it blurred together into background noise. Daniel was aware of only two things, his breath and the slow passing of time. Minutes passed, then more. Daniel checked his phone, not expecting anything. Still nothing. No messages, no calls. The silence remained complete. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and laughed quietly to himself. Not bitterly, not sadly, just once short and surprised. "Guess that's that," he muttered. He did not know what he meant by it. The night, the waiting, the stranger, all of it. A bus approached again, its headlights cutting through the snow. This time Daniel stood halfway before stopping himself. He hesitated, standing there in the cold, unsure whether to commit. The bus slowed. Daniel looked down the street in the direction the stranger had walked, then back toward the bus. The doors remained closed. The driver waited. Daniel sat back down. The bus moved on. Daniel exhaled slowly, not disappointed, not relieved, just aware that he was still here and that staying no longer felt like punishment. The stranger's absence was noticeable now, like a quiet echo, but the bench did not feel empty. The conversation lingered unfinished, unresolved, but intact. Whatever the phone call had been about, it was no longer Daniel's concern. And that uncertainty, strange as it felt, kept the night open. The snow thickened, softening the edges of everything it touched. Streetlights blurred into pale halos. The city felt quieter now, as if Christmas Eve itself were slowing down, making room for whatever came next. Daniel remained on the bench, hands tucked into his coat sleeves, shoulders slightly hunched. He did not feel abandoned by the stranger's departure. He felt paused, as if the night had pressed a finger to its lips and asked him to wait just a little longer. He replayed the moment in his head, the calm way the man had stood, the brief glow of the phone, the lack of explanation. No promises had been made, no hope had been offered carelessly, and that strangely made the moment feel honest. If nothing came of it, Daniel would not feel foolish for believing too much. Another bus passed slower than the others, its engine low and tired. Daniel watched it without urgency. The ticket stayed in his pocket untouched. He thought about what the stranger had said earlier, about being there, about worth not always being visible. The words did not demand action. They simply stayed with him like something set gently on a table instead of pushed into his hands. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He pictured his front door again, the scuffed paint near the handle, the familiar creak when it opened, the warmth inside. He imagined walking in without explanations, without good news, just quiet honesty. The image still hurt, but it no longer felt unbearable. When he opened his eyes, the bench across from him was empty. Snow covered the spot where the stranger had sat, already erasing proof that anyone else had been there at all. Daniel smiled faintly. Some things didn't need proof either. Time passed. He did not know how much. The night felt suspended, stretched thin between what had been and what might be. He checked his phone again, more out of habit than expectation. Nothing. He slid it back into his pocket and leaned back, breathing evenly. If the stranger's call had been about something Daniel did not know, if it had been nothing at all, that was fine too. What mattered was that the stranger had not asked him to wait, had not told him to hope, had not promised a better morning. And yet here Daniel was, still waiting, still breathing, still present on Christmas Eve. The mystery remained untouched, resting quietly beside him on the bench as the snow continued to fall and the night held its breath. Morning arrived without ceremony. There was no sudden brightness, no dramatic shift in the sky, just a gradual lightening, a pale gray replacing the darkness as snow continued to fall, quieter now, almost respectful. Daniel stirred on the bench, his body stiff and aching, his breath shallow at first as cold air filled his lungs. He opened his eyes slowly. For a moment he did not remember where he was. Then the ache in his back, the numbness in his legs, and the familiar outline of the bus shelter came back into focus. Snow covered the ground more completely now, smoothing the street into something softer, less sharp than it had been the night before. Christmas morning. The thought landed gently without the weight he had expected. Daniel sat up carefully, rubbing his hands together, wincing as sensation returned to his fingers. He looked around, half expecting the bench across from him to still be occupied. It was empty. Snow had settled there undisturbed, erasing any sign that someone else had sat with him through the night. For a brief moment he wondered if he had imagined it all. The conversation, the quiet understanding, the stranger who had listened without asking anything in return. Daniel exhaled slowly and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his phone. The screen lit up brighter than it had the night before. He squinted against it, then froze. There was a notification, not an advertisement, not a reminder, a voicemail. His heart began to beat faster, not with excitement, but with caution. He had learned not to trust moments like this. Hope, when it arrived too suddenly, often left just as fast. He hesitated, then pressed play. A voice filled the quiet shelter. Professional. Direct. Not overly cheerful. They had received his application, a shop on the industrial side of town. Short-staffed, needed someone immediately. 1 day of work to start, early hours, real pay. If it went well, maybe more shifts after the holiday. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. The voicemail ended. He did not move. He did not smile. He did not cry. He did not laugh or whisper, "Thank you," into the cold air. He simply sat there, phone resting in his hand, breathing carefully as if the moment might shatter if he reacted too quickly. 1 day, that was all it promised. 1 honest day of work. Enough to earn something. Enough to hold on to. Enough to walk through a door without feeling completely empty. Daniel stared at the snow-covered street, his thoughts moving slowly, deliberately. The stranger's phone call from the night before echoed in his mind not as an explanation, but as a quiet presence. He did not know if the two were connected. He did not need to. For the first time in months, the future did not feel like a blank wall. It felt like a single step. Christmas morning settled around him quiet and white as Daniel Carter sat very still on a cold bench, absorbing the fact that the day had begun differently than he had expected. Daniel finally moved, not because he felt ready, but because his body demanded it. His legs protested as he stood, joint-stiff muscles sore from the long night. He stamped his feet lightly to bring warmth back, breath fogging the cold air in slow bursts. The city around him was waking up, but it did so gently, as if aware of the day it was stepping into. Christmas morning looked different in daylight. Snow covered everything evenly now, muting sharp corners and dulling the noise of traffic. The streets felt softer, quieter. Decorations that had looked tired and strained the night before now seemed almost tender under the pale light. Even the bus stop felt less like a place of waiting and more like a pause between chapters. Daniel checked the voicemail again, listening carefully, afraid he had imagined a detail. The address, the start time, the certainty in the voice on the other end. It was real. It did not promise a future. It did not pretend to solve everything. It simply offered work. He nodded to himself, once a small gesture of acceptance. His hand still shook slightly as he tucked the phone back into his pocket. The ticket remained there too, folded and creased, but now it felt lighter somehow. Not because it mattered less, but because it no longer carried all the weight alone. Daniel sat back down on the bench briefly, as if grounding himself before moving on. He rested his elbows on his knees and stared at the snow-covered sidewalk, letting the reality settle without rushing it. He did not allow himself to think too far ahead. Tomorrow was still unknown. Next week remained uncertain. But today had shape. 1 honest day of work meant something. It meant purpose, however temporary. It meant he could look his child in the eye and say he had somewhere to be. It meant he could bring home more than apologies and quiet explanations. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the tightness in his chest loosen, just a fraction. He thought again of the stranger from the night before, the calm presence, the refusal to promise anything, the simple act of listening. Daniel did not know if that phone call had anything to do with this morning. He would never know. And he realized standing there in the cold that he did not need to. Some things were not meant to be traced back or explained. Some kindnesses worked best when left anonymous, allowed to blend into the fabric of the day like snow into pavement. Daniel stood again, steadier this time. He brushed snow from his coat and glanced once more down the street where the stranger had walked away hours earlier. There was no sign of him now, just quiet. Christmas morning breathed around him clean and unhurried. Daniel Carter took one last look at the bench, then turned toward the road, ready to catch the next bus. Not home yet, not quite, but toward something real. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough to begin. The bus ride felt different this time. Daniel sat near the window, watching the city slide past under a clean layer of snow. Christmas morning traffic was light. Stores were closed. Streets were quiet. People were home. And for the first time in weeks, Daniel was going somewhere with purpose. The shop was on the industrial side of town, a low building with faded signage and a parking lot half covered in snow. The lights were on inside. That alone steadied him. He stepped off the bus and walked toward the entrance. his breath slow, his shoulders squared. Inside, the air smelled like oil and metal. It hit him immediately. The scent brought back muscle memory before thought. He signed in, was handed a simple list of tasks, and shown where to start. No speeches, no sympathy, just work that needed doing. Daniel pulled on gloves and got to it. A machine had been down for weeks, they told him. Nothing urgent, just something no one had gotten around to fixing. Daniel knelt beside it, listening. Not just hearing the noise, but feeling it. He closed his eyes briefly, letting his hands guide him the way they always had. There it was, a loose component, worn from time and neglect. Daniel reached for a tool without thinking, tightening, adjusting, testing. The machine hummed differently almost immediately. Smoother, calmer. He stayed with it, checking twice, making sure it was right. When he stood, his hands were dirty again. He stared at them for a moment, surprised by the relief that washed through him. Not joy, not pride, something steadier, something older, usefulness. The hours passed quietly. Daniel moved from one task to the next, focused and thorough. He didn't rush, he didn't complain, he didn't need to. Each small repair was a conversation between his hands and the problem in front of him. Fix this, adjust that, make it work. Someone brought coffee around mid-morning. Daniel accepted it with a nod, warming his hands around the cup before setting it down and returning to the work. No one asked why he was there on Christmas. No one needed to. This was enough. He worked through lunch, barely noticing the time. Muscles he hadn't used properly in months ached in a familiar way. The good kind. The kind that reminded him he still knew how to do this. At one point, a supervisor stopped nearby and watched him work for a few moments. "You know what you're doing?" the man said simply. Daniel nodded. "Yeah," he replied. That was it. No praise, no backstory, just recognition. And that recognition mattered more than Daniel had expected. It didn't inflate him. It grounded him. By mid-afternoon, the list was finished. Machines were running. Problems were solved. Daniel wiped his hands clean and signed out. The supervisor handed him an envelope. Inside was a paycheck. Not large, not life-changing, but real. Earned. Daniel held it for a moment longer than necessary, then folded it carefully and slid it into his pocket. As he stepped back outside into the cold snow crunching beneath his boots, Daniel felt something settle inside him. Today he had worked, and that was everything. The cold air outside felt sharper after the warmth of the shop, but Daniel welcomed it. It cleared his head. He stood for a moment near the entrance, adjusting his coat, feeling the ache in his arms and shoulders. It was the kind of ache that reminded him he had been useful, that he had given something back to the world instead of just waiting for it to decide his worth. He walked to the bus stop slowly, not out of exhaustion, but intention. Each step felt deliberate. Snow crunched beneath his boots, leaving a clear trail behind him. He watched his breath rise and disappear, steady and even. When the bus arrived, Daniel boarded without hesitation. He took a seat near the back, resting his hands on his knees. They were clean now, but he could still feel the memory of the work in them, the weight of the tools, the resistance of stubborn bolts, the quiet satisfaction of hearing a machine run the way it was supposed to. Those sensations stayed with him deeper than the dirt ever had. He thought about the envelope in his pocket. The paycheck was modest. It would not erase the past months. It would not solve everything waiting beyond today. But it was honest. It was proof that his skills still mattered, that someone had needed what he could do and trusted him to do it right. That mattered more than the amount. The bus moved through the city, passing houses lit softly from within. Christmas trees glowed in windows. Curtains were drawn halfway, giving glimpses of warmth and quiet gatherings. Daniel watched without envy this time. He felt closer to that world now, even from a distance. At a stoplight, he reached into his pocket and touched the edge of the envelope again. He did not open it. He did not count the money. He did not need to. Knowing it was there was enough. His thoughts returned briefly to the stranger from the night before, the calm presence, the choice to listen instead of fix. Daniel wondered if the man was already home somewhere warm, sitting at a table or standing quietly by a window. He wondered if the man even remembered the conversation the way Daniel did. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Either way, the effect remained. The bus slowed as it neared Daniel's stop. He stood steady on his feet and stepped off into the snow-covered street. The air smelled clean, quiet. He paused for a moment, looking up at the pale winter sky. Christmas afternoon light filtered through the clouds, soft and forgiving. Daniel realized then that work had done more than earn him money. It had returned something he thought he had lost, not confidence, not certainty, but dignity. He had not been given anything. He had contributed. That distinction mattered deeply. Daniel turned and walked toward the next bus stop, toward the last leg of the journey. Home was closer now, not because problems had vanished, but because he was no longer empty-handed in the way that mattered most. He carried effort with him. He carried proof that he could still stand on his own 2 feet. And as Christmas continued quietly around him, Daniel Carter moved forward, with something real in his pocket, and something stronger in his chest, ready for whatever waited on the other side of the door. Daniel stepped into the store, with the envelope still warm in his pocket. The noise hit him immediately. Music played too loudly from overhead speakers. Carts rattled across tile floors. Voices overlapped in hurried conversations, sharp with last-minute stress and excitement. The store was crowded, packed with people who had waited until the final hours to buy what they needed. A few hours ago, this place would have felt overwhelming. Now it felt manageable. Daniel paused just inside the entrance, letting his eyes adjust, letting his breathing settle. He did not rush. He did not feel the familiar urge to turn around and leave. He had come here with a purpose, and that purpose anchored him. He thought first of his child, not the biggest gift, not the loudest, just something that would feel chosen, something that said, "I see you." He walked slowly down the toy aisle, scanning shelves without urgency. Bright colors, plastic packaging, rows of things designed to be wanted. Daniel stopped in front of a small display. A simple toy sat there. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. Something that encouraged imagination instead of noise. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and smiled faintly. He could already picture how it would be played with, how it would be taken apart and put back together, how questions would follow. This one felt right. He placed it in his basket gently, as if it mattered how it landed. Next, he moved toward the clothing section. His wife came to mind, the way she always complained about the cold, but never bought herself anything new. The way she wrapped herself tighter, instead of replacing what had worn thin. Daniel ran his fingers across a rack of scarves, feeling the fabric. He chose one that was soft and warm, without being extravagant. A color she liked, something practical but thoughtful. He held it up, imagining her reaction. Not surprise, not shock. Just that small, quiet smile she gave when she felt understood. Into the basket it went. The store buzzed around him. A child cried somewhere nearby. A cashier called for backup. Someone laughed too loudly. Daniel felt separate from it all, moving through the noise with calm focus. He passed displays advertising deals he could not afford and did not need. He was not here to prove anything. He was here to bring something home that meant more than its price tag. As he walked toward the checkout, Daniel caught his reflection in a mirrored pillar. He looked tired. His eyes were still shadowed from the long night. His coat was worn, but there was something else there now, a steadiness, a quiet resolve that had not been present before. He reached the register and waited patiently as the line moved forward. When it was his turn, he placed the items on the counter without hesitation. The cashier rang them up quickly, barely looking up. Daniel handed over the money, watching it leave his hands without regret. When the receipt printed, he folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. He picked up the small bag, feeling its weight. Light, modest, real. As he stepped back outside into the cold, the noise of the store faded behind him. Daniel stood there for a moment, snow brushing his coat bag in hand. He was not just carrying presents. He was carrying proof that he had shown up today. Daniel walked away from the store slowly, the small bag swinging lightly at his side. The noise behind him faded with each step, replaced by the muted hush of snow-covered streets. Cars moved carefully now. Footsteps sounded softer. Christmas felt closer, more personal, as if the day itself had narrowed its focus. He stopped beneath a streetlight and looked into the bag again, just to be sure. The toy was there. The scarf was folded neatly beside it. Nothing extra, nothing wasted, everything chosen with care. He nodded once, satisfied. A few weeks ago, he would have felt embarrassed carrying so little. Tonight, it felt right. It felt honest. These were not gifts meant to distract or impress. They were meant to say, I tried. I was here. I didn't give up. Daniel thought about how his child would tear into the wrapping without worrying about cost, how the joy would come from possibility, not price. He thought about how his wife would hold the scarf for a moment before putting it on, appreciating the warmth more than the gesture itself. That image stayed with him as he walked. He reached the bus stop and waited, bag tucked close to his side. When the bus arrived, he boarded easily, finding a seat near the window. The city slid past again, but this time he barely noticed it. His thoughts were already home. The bus was quieter now, fewer riders. Most of them carried bags like his, small and purposeful. Daniel wondered briefly about their stories, then let the thought go. Tonight, his own story felt enough. He reached into his pocket and felt the remaining money. Not much, but enough. Enough to mean that today had mattered, enough to remind him that effort still counted. The bus slowed near his stop. Daniel stood steady and stepped down onto familiar pavement. Snow dusted the sidewalk. The air smelled like winter and something faintly sweet, maybe from a nearby bakery closing up for the day. He paused outside his building. The door was the same as it had always been. The light in the window upstairs was on. Someone was home, waiting. Daniel took a breath, feeling the weight of the bag in his hand and the weight of the day behind him. He was still tired, still uncertain about what came next, but he was no longer empty. He climbed the steps slowly, each one deliberate. At the landing, he stopped again, listening. He could hear movement inside, a television low, a voice, the familiar rhythm of life continuing. Daniel adjusted his coat, shifted the bag to his other hand, and reached for the door. This time, he did not hesitate. He was going home with something more than gifts. He was going home with proof that even on the hardest Christmas, dignity and hope could still be carried quietly, one honest step at a time. Evening came back quietly. The sky darkened without drama, slipping from gray to deep blue as snow began to fall again, heavier than before. Streetlights blinked on one by one, casting warm circles onto the pavement. The city slowed as if Christmas itself was exhaling after a long day. Daniel stood at the bus stop with the same ticket in his pocket. The shelter looked almost identical to the night before. The same bench, the same drooping garlands, the same faint hum of traffic in the distance. Snow gathered along the edges, softening everything it touched. If someone had seen him there now, they might have thought nothing had changed, but everything had. Daniel shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling the ache in his muscles from the day's work. It was a good ache, honest, the kind that came from effort instead of worry. He reached into his coat pocket and felt the envelope again, then the small bag folded carefully beside it. Proof of the day rested against his side, quiet and reassuring. He breathed in slowly, then out. The memory of the night before surfaced without warning. Sitting on the bench, letting buses pass, staring at the ground as if it held answers, feeling like the distance between himself and home was too great to cross. Daniel looked at the bench now and felt no pull toward it. The sound of an approaching bus echoed down the street. Headlights appeared through the falling snow, growing brighter as it neared. Daniel's heart began to beat faster, not from fear but from anticipation. This time he did not close his eyes. The bus slowed. The doors opened with a familiar hiss, releasing a wave of warm air into the cold night. Daniel stepped forward without hesitation and climbed aboard. Inside, the bus was half full. Quiet travelers sat scattered through the rows, coats pulled tight, eyes tired but calm. Some held small bags, some stared out the windows. No one spoke loudly. The night seemed to ask for gentleness, and everyone obeyed. Daniel paid his fare and moved toward the middle of the bus, choosing a seat by the window. He sat down carefully, placing the bag at his feet, one hand resting on it, as if to remind himself it was real. The doors closed. The bus pulled away from the curb. As it moved, Daniel watched the bus stop, fade behind them, swallowed by snow and distance. The bench disappeared first, then the shelter, then the streetlight. He felt his chest tighten, then loosen again. The bus rolled through familiar streets, tires hissing softly over wet pavement. Houses passed by windows glowing with warm light. Christmas trees flickered behind curtains. Shadows moved inside families, gathering voices, low and close. Daniel pressed his forehead lightly against the glass, watching it all slide past. His heart raced not with panic, but with something close to relief. Each block carried him farther from the bench and closer to the door he had been afraid to open. He thought of the ticket now no longer a burden, but a bridge. It had waited patiently in his pocket all night, all day, and now it was doing exactly what it had been meant to do. The bus moved steadily forward, carrying Daniel Carter home, and this time he was ready for where it would stop. Daniel sat still as the bus carried him forward, his body swaying gently with each turn. The heater hummed softly beneath the floor, sending warmth up through his boots. He rested one hand on his knee and the other lightly against the bag at his feet, grounding himself in the moment. Across the aisle, an older woman stared straight ahead, hands folded around her purse. A few rows up, a couple leaned toward each other, whispering quietly. Near the back, a man slept with his head against the window, breath fogging the glass. No one spoke. No one rushed. The bus felt like a shared pause, a moving room full of people returning to something that mattered. Daniel looked out the window again. Snow streaked past in soft lines, catching the light before disappearing into darkness. Street after street passed by, each one stirring a memory. The corner where he used to stop for coffee on early mornings. The hardware store he once visited on lunch breaks. The park where his child had learned to ride a bike. All of it felt closer now, not just in distance, but in meaning. His heart beat faster as the bus neared his stop. He had imagined this moment dozens of times during the night before. Usually the image ended with him standing frozen, unable to move. Tonight, there was no freezing, only a steady awareness of what waited beyond the doors. The bus slowed. Daniel stood, gripping the pole briefly for balance. His legs felt tired, but strong. The good kind of tired. The driver glanced back and nodded as Daniel moved toward the exit. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in sharp and clean, carrying the smell of snow and winter. Daniel stepped down onto the sidewalk, boots crunching softly. The bus pulled away behind him, its lights shrinking as it continued on, carrying others toward their own endings. Daniel did not look back. He adjusted the bag in his hand and started down the street. His building stood just ahead, lights glowing in familiar windows. Snow clung to the steps and railings untouched since the last storm. Each step brought a quiet sense of completion. He reached the front of the building and paused, not from fear, but from awareness. He took in the moment, the cold on his face, the warmth waiting inside, the weight of the day in his body. Daniel reached into his pocket and felt the edge of the ticket one last time. It was worn now, creased beyond use. He smiled faintly and left it there. The hardest part of Christmas had not been being alone. It had been believing he did not deserve to return. Standing there now, he understood something clearly. He was not arriving empty-handed. He carried effort. He carried truth. He carried himself. And as snow continued to fall behind him, Daniel Carter turned toward the door, ready to go home at last. Across the street, partially hidden by falling snow and the dim glow of a streetlight, Keanu stood still. He had arrived without being noticed. No one turned their head when he stopped. No one recognized him as anything other than another figure in a dark coat, shoulders, dusted white hands resting loosely in his pockets. He did not position himself close to the bus stop. He did not want to intrude on the moment. He stood just far enough away to see without being seen. The bus doors closed with a familiar hiss. Keanu watched as the vehicle pulled away from the curb, its tires cutting through. Slush, its lights glowing softly before fading into the snowy night. He followed it with his eyes as long as he could until the shape of it blurred and disappeared, swallowed by distance and weather. He did not wave. He did not smile broadly or sigh in relief. He simply watched. Snow settled on his coat, clinging to the fabric, melting slowly. He did not brush it away. The cold did not seem to bother him. His face was calm, thoughtful, peaceful in a way that came from quiet certainty rather than satisfaction. He knew the man on that bus would never see him standing there, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Keanu shifted his weight slightly, boots crunching softly against the snow-covered pavement. The city felt quieter here, as if the sound of the bus leaving had carried something with it. He took a slow breath and let it out, watching the vapor rise and vanish. Moments like this had always mattered more to him than recognition. He did not think in terms of credit or outcomes. He did not replay conversations looking for validation. He believed deeply in the idea that the smallest actions done without expectation often traveled the farthest. Keanu looked back toward the bus stop. The bench was empty now. Snow covered the place where two men had sat the night before, erasing any sign of their conversation. If someone passed by later, they would see nothing unusual. Just another bus stop. Another quiet street on Christmas evening. That felt right to him. He remembered the sound of the man's voice when he spoke about dignity, the careful way he had folded the ticket, the restraint in his words, the pride beneath the pain. Keanu had not needed to ask many questions. He had recognized the weight immediately. Some things were universal. He had not promised anything because promises changed the nature of the moment. They shifted focus away from the person and toward the outcome. Keanu had learned long ago that being present, truly present, was often the most honest thing a person could offer. He had made the call quietly, without ceremony, without telling anyone why. It was not about fixing a life. It was about opening a door that effort could walk through on its own. Now standing there, watching the empty street, Keanu felt no urge to check his phone or confirm anything. Whatever happened next belonged to the man on the bus, not to him. Keanu took one last look down the road where the bus had gone, then turned slightly, stepping back into the shadow cast by the building behind him. Christmas lights flickered faintly nearby. Snow continued to fall, and Keanu remained exactly where he was, content to let the moment belong to someone else. Keanu began to walk slowly down the sidewalk, not toward the bus stop, but away from it. His steps were unhurried, measured, leaving shallow impressions in the snow that would soon disappear. The night felt complete in a quiet, unspoken way, as if it had delivered what it needed to without asking for applause. He did not think about the phone call anymore. Once made, it no longer belonged to him. What mattered had already happened before that. Two strangers had shared a bench. One had been allowed to speak without being rushed. The other had listened without trying to solve. That exchange was the real moment. Keanu believed deeply in that kind of presence, the kind that did not announce itself, the kind that did not linger for thanks. He had learned through loss and time that the most meaningful acts were often invisible once they were complete. He paused briefly at the corner, glancing back once more. The bus stop was just a shape now beneath the streetlight. Snow drifted across its softening edges, erasing footprints. By morning, there would be no sign that anything unusual had occurred there. No marker, no memory left behind for passers-by, only a man on his way home. Keanu felt a quiet satisfaction in that anonymity, not pride, not accomplishment, just peace. The peace that came from knowing he had not taken anything from the moment, only contributed to it. He adjusted his coat and continued walking. As he moved through the city, he passed houses lit warmly from within. Windows glowed with the soft light of Christmas trees. Shadows moved inside families, gathered close voices, low and familiar. He did not linger. He did not imagine himself inside those rooms. He simply acknowledged their existence, like chapters in a story continuing on without him. Snowflakes brushed his face, melting instantly. The air smelled clean and cold. Keanu thought briefly about how easily moments like this could be missed. How many people passed one another every day without seeing the weight being carried. How often the right response was not advice, but patience. He did not see himself as a rescuer. That word never sat right with him. Rescuing implied ownership of the outcome. He preferred something simpler: showing up, listening, stepping aside when it was time. That was enough. By the time he reached the end of the block, the bus was long gone, the street quiet again. Keanu did not look for another bus. He did not wait. He turned down a side street, disappearing into the softly falling snow, just another man walking through Christmas night. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Carter was stepping closer to his front door. Somewhere else, a family was about to hear that door open. Somewhere, hope was returning quietly, without announcement. Keanu did not need to see any of that. He had already seen what mattered. And with that, he continued on, leaving no trace behind but the brief impression of footsteps in the snow, already fading, already gone. Daniel stood in the hallway outside his apartment longer than he needed to. The door was familiar. Same chipped paint near the handle, same faint scratch along the bottom where shoes had brushed it for years. Warm light spilled out from beneath it, a thin golden line cutting across the floor. He could hear the muffled sound of the television inside, turned low, as if no one wanted it to interrupt the waiting. He adjusted his grip on the small bag, then raised his hand and knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. His child was there first, small arms wrapped around his waist before Daniel could even finish stepping inside. The force of it caught him off guard, knocking the breath from his lungs in the best possible way. He dropped the bag gently to the floor and wrapped his arms around that small, familiar body, holding on as if letting go might undo the moment. "You're home," his child said, voice muffled against his coat. Daniel nodded, unable to speak yet. He pressed his chin lightly against the top of their head, breathing in the scent of soap and warmth. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. Everything else fell away. Behind them, his wife stood, frozen for half a second too long. Her hand was still on the doorframe. Her coat was still on, as if she had been ready to leave and search for him herself. When their eyes met, something shifted in her expression. Relief came first, then disbelief, then tears, sudden and unguarded, filling her eyes before she could stop them. Daniel straightened slowly, keeping one arm around his child as he looked at her. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said quietly. She shook her head immediately, crossing the room in 2 steps and placing her hand on his arm, then his cheek, as if checking that he was really there. "You're here," she said. "That's all." She pulled him into a hug that was firm and grounding, her forehead resting against his chest for a moment longer than usual. Daniel felt her shoulders rise and fall as she took a steadying breath. No one asked questions. No one asked where he had been or why it had taken so long. There was no room for explanations in this moment, and none were needed. Presence filled the space where words usually tried to fit. Daniel bent down and picked up the bag from the floor. "I've got something," he said gently. His child's eyes widened, curiosity lighting up their face. Daniel knelt and opened the bag, pulling out the toy first. It was small, simple, but it was chosen. His child took it carefully, as if it mattered how it was handled, then broke into a smile that reached their eyes. "Thank you," they said, already imagining 100 ways to play. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He reached back into the bag and pulled out the scarf, offering it to his wife. She took it slowly, running her fingers over the fabric before wrapping it around her neck. It fit perfectly. She smiled, not broadly but deeply. "You didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to," Daniel replied. She stepped closer and rested her head against his shoulder scarf, brushing his cheek. The television continued murmuring in the background. Snow tapped softly against the window. Christmas had found its way back into the room, not through abundance, but through return. Later, the apartment settled into a quiet rhythm. The child sat on the floor, absorbed in play, the toy already surrounded by imagined worlds and whispered sound effects. Daniel sat nearby, watching without interrupting his presence enough. His wife moved through the small kitchen, preparing something warm, the familiar sounds grounding him further into the evening. Daniel leaned back on the couch, finally allowing his body to rest. The exhaustion hit him all at once, not the sharp edge of worry, but the deep, earned tiredness that followed a long day done right. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, unwilling to miss even a second of this ordinary miracle. His wife brought him a mug and set it gently in his hands. "Here," she said. "You looked cold." He wrapped his fingers around it, letting the warmth seep in. "Thank you." She sat beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence between them felt safe, shared, complete. "I was worried," she admitted quietly. "I know," Daniel said. "I didn't mean to scare you." She shook her head. "I just didn't want you to feel like you had to carry everything alone." Daniel looked at her, then really looked. "I thought I did," he said. "I thought that was my job." She met his gaze steadily. "Your job is to come home," she said. "The rest we figure out together." Daniel nodded, emotion pressing against his chest again, but this time it didn't hurt. He thought about the bench, the ticket, the long night of waiting, the stranger who had listened without asking for anything back, the quiet phone call made without promises. None of it felt distant now. It felt like a bridge he had crossed to get here. He reached for his wife's hand and squeezed it gently. "I worked today," he said. "Just one day." Her eyes softened. "That's enough," she replied. He didn't argue. For once he believed it. The child looked up from the floor toy in hand. "Dad," they said, "will you help me with this?" Daniel smiled and leaned forward. "Yeah," he said. "Of course." He joined them on the floor, sitting cross-legged, hands moving instinctively, fixing, adjusting, building something together. Laughter came easily, now unforced. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the city in quiet white. Inside, the apartment glowed with something warmer than light. Daniel Carter had come home. Not with everything solved, not with answers for tomorrow, but with effort behind him, love in front of him, and the simple truth that sometimes the greatest gift a man can bring home is himself fully present at last. Later that night, when the apartment had finally gone quiet, Daniel sat alone at the small kitchen table. The dishes were done, the lights were dimmed. His wife and child slept in the other room, their breathing soft and steady, filling the apartment with a calm he had not felt in months. Snow tapped lightly against the window, a gentle reminder that the world outside was still moving, still cold, still uncertain. Daniel wrapped his hands around a mug that had long since gone lukewarm. His body was tired in a way that felt earned, muscles sore from work, mind heavy from emotion. But beneath it all was a stillness he had almost forgotten how to recognize. He let himself sit inside it, not reaching for distraction, not bracing for the next problem. His thoughts returned not to the job, but to the bench, to the long night, to the waiting, to the quiet stranger who had listened without interruption, without judgment, without expectation. Daniel realized then that the turning point of the day had not been the voicemail. It had not been the paycheck folded carefully in his pocket. It had not even been the moment the bus doors closed and carried him home. It had been earlier than that. It had been the moment he said the truth out loud, and nothing bad happened. No correction, no advice, no reminder of what he should have done differently. Just space. Daniel had spent months measuring himself against invisible standards, against the man he used to be, against the provider he thought he was supposed to remain at all costs. Every conversation, every interaction had felt like a test he was failing quietly. But that night on that bench, someone had seen him exactly where he was and had not asked him to become anything else. That mattered more than he had understood at the time. Daniel looked down at his hands again, turning them slowly under the light. They were still rough, still worn, still capable. But for the first time in a long while, he did not see them as evidence of what he had lost. He saw them as proof of what remained. He thought about how quickly he had believed that worth disappeared the moment work did, how easily shame had filled the space where pride used to live. He had been so focused on what he could no longer bring home that he had forgotten what he still carried with him every day. Presence, effort, love. The job had helped. The money mattered. The gifts had brought smiles he would remember for a long time, but none of those things were the real gift. The real gift had been permission. Permission to be tired without being broken. Permission to arrive without proof. Permission to be seen as a man in transition, not a man who had failed. Daniel leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time that night, the question he had feared did not echo in his mind. Did you find work? Instead, another thought took its place, quieter and steadier. You came home. And that, he understood now, was what Christmas had given him long before morning arrived. Daniel opened his eyes and listened to the quiet apartment again. The refrigerator hummed softly. Pipes clicked once, then settled. Somewhere in the building a door closed and footsteps faded. Ordinary sounds, comforting sounds, proof that life was continuing, steady and unremarkable. He realized how much he had missed that. For months, every sound had felt like a reminder of what he was failing to do. Bills sliding through the mail slot, phones vibrating with nothing important. Even silence had felt accusatory. Tonight, silence felt different. It felt earned. Daniel thought about his child's face earlier, the way joy had arrived without calculation. About his wife's hands on his cheeks, checking that he was real, not asking for explanations. None of them had needed proof. None of them had demanded answers before offering relief. He had demanded those things from himself. He had believed that love was conditional, that belonging had to be justified daily, that walking through the door without results meant walking in smaller, somehow. He saw now how heavy that belief had been, how it had bent him inward without him noticing. Being seen had changed that, not praised, not rescued, seen. The stranger on the bench had not taken his pain away. He had not minimized it or wrapped it in optimism. He had allowed it to exist without judgment. That simple act had done something Daniel had not known he needed. It had returned him to himself. Daniel leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table, fingers interlaced. He breathed in deeply and let it out slowly. The tightness he had carried for so long loosened again a little more this time. He understood now that dignity was not something given by work or taken away by loss. It was something quieter, something internal, something that could survive even the longest nights if it was protected long enough to be felt again. Christmas had not solved his problems. Tomorrow would still bring uncertainty. The job might not last. The future was still fragile, still unclear, but fragility no longer felt like failure. It felt human. Daniel stood and walked quietly to the doorway, looking in on his family as they slept. His child curled on their side toy, tucked close. His wife breathing evenly, one arm flung across the bed as if she had reached for him in her sleep. Daniel stayed there for a long moment, letting the sight settle into him. He had made it back. Not triumphant, not fixed, but present. And presence, he understood now, was not a consolation prize. It was the foundation everything else stood on. Daniel turned off the light and returned to bed, slipping in beside his wife carefully. She shifted toward him without waking instinctively, as if she had known he would be there. As he closed his eyes, one final truth settled gently in his chest. Christmas had not given him a miracle. It had given him himself back. The bus stop stood empty again. Snow fell softly through the glow of the streetlight, drifting down in slow, patient arcs. The bench was bare, the shelter quiet. Footprints that had once marked waiting and hesitation were already fading, softened by fresh snowfall, until they blended back into the sidewalk like they had never been there at all. Christmas lights flickered faintly above the street, their colors muted but steady, holding against the dark. Nothing about the place suggested that anything important had happened here, and yet something had. The night before, a man had sat on that bench, believing he did not deserve to go home. He had measured himself by what he could not carry. He had waited not for a bus, but for permission to feel whole again. And beside him, without announcement or recognition, someone had chosen to sit, not to fix, not to rescue, not to be thanked, just to be there. The city moved on as cities always do. Buses came and went, music echoed and faded, snow fell and covered the evidence. By morning, no one passing by would know that two strangers had shared a moment that quietly changed the direction of a life. That is how it usually happens. The most meaningful kindness rarely leaves a mark that can be photographed or proven. It does not announce itself. It does not wait for applause. It arrives quietly, does what it needs to do, and disappears before anyone thinks to name it. Daniel Carter would wake up in his own bed that morning. He would carry the memory with him not as a debt, but as a reminder. A reminder that dignity can survive waiting. That worth does not vanish in silence. That sometimes the difference between staying stuck and moving forward is not advice or money or miracles. Sometimes it is being seen. The snow continued to fall, filling in the last traces of footprints near the curb. The bench looked untouched now, as if it had always been empty. But something lingered there anyway, not in the concrete or the metal, in the quiet understanding that moments like this happen all the time unnoticed. Someone sits, someone listens, someone steps aside when it is time, and a life moves forward without ever knowing exactly why. Christmas does not always arrive wrapped in paper and ribbon. Sometimes it arrives as patience. Sometimes it arrives as restraint. Sometimes it arrives as a phone call made without explanation, or a conversation held without curiosity. And sometimes it arrives simply because one person chose not to walk past another. The bus stop remained still under the falling snowlights glowing softly against the dark. The city breathed around it, indifferent and beautiful in equal measure. Tomorrow people would stand there again, waiting, wondering, carrying their own quiet burdens. Most of them would never know how close they were to a turning point. And that is the quiet truth of kindness. It does not need to be remembered to matter. As the snow continued to fall, the street remained quiet, unchanged, on the surface ordinary to anyone passing by. Cars rolled through slowly. A bus approached, stopped briefly, then moved on again. No one noticed the bench. No one wondered who had sat there the night before. That is how most turning points exist. They do not announce themselves. They do not ask to be witnessed. They pass through lives quietly, leaving behind no evidence except a subtle shift in direction. A person goes home instead of staying. A hand reaches for a door instead of pulling away. A morning begins with effort instead of resignation. Daniel's story did not end with certainty. It ended with movement, with the decision to board a bus, with the courage to arrive without pretending to be whole, with the understanding that dignity is not something you earn only on good days. Somewhere tonight, someone else is sitting on a bench just like this one, holding something small and heavy. A ticket, a fear, a reason not to go home yet. They may believe their worth has already been measured and found lacking. They may think the world has moved on without them. They may be wrong. Sometimes the smallest kindness is not the loudest gesture. It is not charity or advice or grand promises. It is presence. It is restraint. It is allowing another person to exist in their truth without rushing them toward an answer. That kind of kindness leaves no signature, but it changes everything. As the snow softens the city, as Christmas lights glow quietly in windows across the street, the bus stop waits again. It waits for the next tired body, the next heavy silence, the next moment where one person chooses not to walk past another. And maybe that moment will pass unnoticed too. Or maybe someone watching this remembers a night when a stranger did not ask questions, when someone listened instead of fixing, when a quiet presence changed the shape of a difficult season. If you have ever been that person on the bench waiting unsure if you deserve to go home, yet know this: your worth does not disappear in silence. Your value is not erased by one hard season. And if you have ever been the person who chose to sit beside someone instead of passing by, remember this: you may never see the ending. You may never be thanked, but your presence may have mattered more than you will ever know. So, before this story ends, take a moment. Have you ever experienced a moment when a stranger changed your life without even realizing it? Or have you ever been that stranger for someone else? Share your story in the comments. someone reading it may be closer to their own turning point than they think. And if this story reminded you that quiet kindness still exists, that dignity can survive even the longest nights, consider staying with us. There are more stories like this waiting to be told. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive without wrapping paper. Sometimes they arrive as a seat on a cold bench. And sometimes they arrive because someone chose to stay.